Hi there, welcome back to this week's coaching video. It's going to be a little bit different today. We're not necessarily going to talk about a specific scenario, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about trauma and the brain and chronic stress from difficult circumstances and difficult relationships, and how all that ties into our mindset and the concepts that we've been talking about in these videos, the 5 questions to manage difficult relationships that can also be used to manage difficult circumstances, and how it all ties together. So I want to start, and I'm going to give a disclaimer that when I talk about the brain, understand that this is my words and the way I understand it. This is not like, don't use this to study for any sort of like, I don't know, biology exam or anything. But here's where I'm going with all of this. Okay, so when we think about the brain kind of has 3 parts. There's the primitive part of the brain, this reptilian brain that is really just concerned about survival. This is the part of our brain that sort of functions without us even really knowing. It's the part that takes care of and is concerned about whether we have food and shelter and water, and our basic needs are met and taken care of. It's the part of the brain that responds with a fight or flight response when it senses that there's danger. We don't have to consciously make that decision in our brain just does it. And so this is the primitive part of the brain. Again, its primary concern is survival and whatever it thinks will lead to our survival. And so fear is a huge component in this part of the brain's decision-making process. Everything is based on fear that this part of the brain does. It's either fearful that socially we'll be set aside, and therefore in a sort of tribal sense we won't be part of the tribe, and then we would die on our own because humans need support and community. The fear that something is out to get us, the fear that if we try something and it doesn't work out, that's going to be detrimental to us. So fear is a big part of this part of the brain. All right, so then we talk about then we have the second part of the brain, which is our mammalian brain. This is a little bit more developed. We share this part of the brain with dogs and cats and horses and other mammals. And this is where we find our feelings and our memory and our emotions, and our moods are regulated here. Hormones are controlled in this part of the brain. And so this is sort of that middle level, a little bit more advanced than the primitive brain, but still not the higher thinking part of the brain. So that part of the brain is the neocortex, the frontal lobes, and this is the most advanced part of the brain. This is the part that only primates have, and this is what the part of our brain that is associated with logic and thinking and planning and higher order thinking, language, social rules and norms, that sort of thing. That's all in that those prefrontal lobes. And so what does that have to do with anything? Great, right? Okay, so when we're thinking about these basic concepts that we've been discussing, that we're only in control of our own thoughts and feelings and emotions, and that we're not responsible for anyone else. And the concept that what other people think about us is none of our business. When we think about how a certain, even when we go through those 5 steps that we've talked about, when we think about our thoughts, then that's the primitive part of that's the advanced part of our brain, the logical part of our brain doing all that thinking. So any mindset work that we're doing, any conscious thought on what our story is and what are the limiting beliefs and why do we feel the way that we feel, all of those things are all happening in the more advanced frontal lobe part of the brain, the logical part of our brain. So we can logically understand a concept. We can study, we can read all the books. This is the part of the brain that buys all the books and listens to the podcasts and decides to go and talk to somebody about, what's going on with us, and decides to go eat what we eat and exercise how we're going to exercise and go to yoga class and all those things. So the thinking part of our brain is that part. And that part of the brain can, just by sheer determination, it can accomplish some stuff, but the primitive brain is always going to take over. And so no matter how much our logical thinking smart part of our brain is trying to solve our problems, to make us feel better, to make us be happy and content and at peace and all that stuff. If the primitive part of our brain, if this reptilian part of our brain is still afraid and doesn't feel safe and doesn't feel secure and doesn't feel like they're okay just the way they are, then no amount of logical thinking is going to counteract that. It might seem like it's counteracting it for a while, but it's like just holding on with sheer determination, and that's only going to last so long before exhaustion kicks in. So, what does all this mean? When we practice meditation, and when we practice deep breaths, and when we use different tools, yoga tools, to rebalance the parasympathetic nervous system, to take the body out of fight or flight, then when the body is relaxed, when the body is not afraid, when the brain feels secure and safe and taken care of, and that all of the basic needs are met, then it can get concerned with, and how are we going to solve some of these higher level issues, emotions, and so relationships and all those sorts of things. But if our basic needs for safety and security and survival don't feel like they're met by our primitive brain, then no amount of self-help books and videos and podcasts will help that. And so we have to do these things together, and that's where the yoga stuff comes in. So rhythmic, smooth, fluid, intentional movement, feeling into the body, really connecting the physical sensations in the body so that we can feel, so that our brain gets the message in our body that we can be still, we must be safe. If we're still, we're probably safe, that we're okay, that where we are is right where we're supposed to be. All of these things, when we can use the tools through meditation and through mindfulness practices and through grounding practices and through gentle movement to be able to trust our own bodies, then that will send the message to the primitive part of the brain that then will allow us to process through our thoughts and our feelings and emotions with those logical concepts that we can think and understand all day long. But that's what helps them really sort of sink in and become part of the wiring in our brain. The more often we can convince our brain, we can train our primitive brain, that reptilian part of our brain, the more often we allow it to feel safe and secure and protected and okay exactly the way it is, then we just have all sorts of space to do whatever else we want to do. That's where the limitless possibilities come in. That's where we can go and do and be and stand in our truth and be who we're meant to be here on this earth. And that's why these things are tied together. And so understanding concepts is great. And buying the books and reading them and understanding and knowing why, and even going back into our past and thinking about, this is why I act this way in this situation, or this is the reason why I respond to this person this way. Knowing those things is great and fine. But if every time that person's number shows up on your caller ID, or every time you see them out and about, if your body immediately goes into a fight or flight response, you get that knot in your stomach, and you get that tension in the body, that's the brain saying, we're not okay, we're not okay, we're not okay. And so no amount of thinking in your head, well, they can just choose their own thoughts and I can just choose not to let them bother me anymore. It doesn't quite work that way. We can't just think ourselves logically out of that fight or flight response. We have to actually train ourselves to understand and to know that we are okay, so that when we see that other person, we've found that place within us that is okay exactly how we are. And then that's where what somebody else does or says can't affect us emotionally and physically, and then we can adjust our thoughts around it. So it's really important that these things go together. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today, because we're going to continue talking about just practical examples of how you would reframe a situation or reframe a relationship. But knowing that that's only part of it, that rebalancing the parasympathetic nervous system is also really important. And I'm going to, I'll be adding in at some point some a freebie to go with this. So some practices to work on rebalancing the parasympathetic nervous system, to bring the body out of that state of fight or flight. Because when we're in chronically stressful relationships, difficult relationships, when we are in a circumstance that creates stress in our life, whether it's because of a relationship or just because circumstances, whether they're health related or circumstances outside of our immediate control, when we have those difficult relationships and circumstances, our body is in a chronic state of fight or flight. And so even if we don't know we are, we start to feel that in the body. We feel the sensations, the knots in the stomach, the butterflies, the tension. We may feel sick to our stomach, or we just may feel tense and unsettled. And those are all signs to ourselves that we're in that chronic state of stress. So we're going to work on some tools to rebalance that. And breath work is a really easy one: quietness, stillness, meditation. And so those are all things that kind of go with the logical part of knowing the concepts of changing our mindset. So that's what I wanted to share for today. I hope y'all have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.